Thanks, Wardy. Yeah, no play yesterday, obviously, but the printing presses still roll and sports pages have to be filled. So I'm joined by Atherton Ehantharajah, who's a feature writer at the Independent. Welcome, and Nass. Did you have a non-filer yesterday? That's the term journalists use, don't they, when you don't have to send in a story or a feature?
No, I did have to file something. So for the Independent, we are website only, but we also have an app service as well. But I was making other plans at 3, and then had to send something through.
What do you reckon the players do, Nass, these days? Because they're not allowed mobile phones in the dressing room, which would throw you completely, since you just stare at a mobile phone for 6 hours a day. What do you reckon they do? Were they watching Spinwash yesterday afternoon?
Good plug, early plug for Spinwash again from you. You've used the word Spinwash 47 times today. I hope so, because they would have had a little smile at you and how difficult touring was all those years ago. They were probably watching that stuff we were talking about, standing on off stump. I know you've had a couple of texts from England players saying what a load of nonsense. So unfortunately they do watch, but I also reckon they probably got a PlayStation or something, whatever they call it nowadays, out back and play their little games.
So we got 3 or 4 stories to look at. As I say, there's still plenty of cricket in the pages, despite the fact that there was no play. The first one I'm going to pick out is Andy Bull, excellent sports writer for The Guardian, and he's done the kind of backstory of Devon Conway, which is fascinating. Nass, I'll come to you first. This guy made his debut as a 17-year-old for Gauteng in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and yet 12 years later he's waiting for his Test match debut.
It is a fascinating story, and I was going to say it's a fairly sort of fairy tale ending, but the way Conway did that interview the other day when he got 100, you feel it's nowhere near an ending for him. He sees this just as a beginning, and I'm afraid for South Africa fans, South African cricketers and the South African cricket administration, it's an all too familiar story. It's not a one-off. There was a stat doing the rounds here the other day that 10% of the 100 scored here at Lord's were by South Africans, but not playing for South Africa. So the talent drain from that country is incredible. Now, he was only averaging something like 21 for the Lions when he left, so he was a good player, not a great player. So the real debate for me, and I had a couple of South Africans text me saying, Nass, the real debate is not just the talent drain, is why is it that people are doing okay in South Africa, and Peterson, for example, but when they leave South Africa and go to England or New Zealand, what is it these other countries are doing to make them great players that we're not doing in South Africa?
Vish, from a journalist perspective, how far do you concentrate on the day, Devon Conway's wonderful 200, and how far do you kind of look at the broader context of his life and the story of his rise? If somebody sent me a piece that was written in South Africa in 2009, Ray White, who was the former president of the Cricket Board of South Africa, saw him play as a 17-year-old and said, if he's not a future star of international cricket, something will have gone seriously wrong. I've seen enough of him to predict he will be in the international team within 6 months. That was 10 years ago. He's basically saying he's the next best thing since Graham Pollock.
Yeah, that is high praise. I suppose from my point of view, looking at the bigger picture is essentially what I'm employed to do, really. I was saying to you off mic just before that, with you two, not just doing your work for Sky, but also working for the Times and Daily Mail, respectively, people want to hear what you say and what, because of what you know about the game, but also of what you know about being out there. Now, I have no frame of reference to being out there, so really, I'm looking at everything from the boundary onwards. So, Andy Bull's piece is spot on in terms of exactly what you want to achieve, or certainly what I would want to achieve in my role. Because, you'll have 2 people, you'll have someone doing the match report, you'll have someone doing the colour piece, and on day 1 there was only one colour piece of cricket to write, and that was Devon Conway, yeah.
How much do you look at that broader story of the talent drain from South Africa? Andy finishes this very good piece saying, according to the World Bank, South Africa's main exports are platinum, gold and iron ore. Presumably runs and wickets must run them a close 4th and 5th, because he's referencing, of course, the success of Simon Harmer, who's been here and doing very well for Essex for many years, Bedingham, who is leading run scorer in the county championship up at Durham this year, is another kind of ex-South Africa, or come from South Africa. How much have you looked at that story over the years?
Well, a lot, because it comes up a lot. Whether it's a player making their England debut or someone who comes over on a cold pack deal, previously. I think, though, the job now is to look a bit further, because we end up just writing the same piece over and over again and referencing different players and different runs and different wickets. And really, I think the broader picture is how skewed the game's economics are by the fact that they obviously leave because they're not getting what's required. And you mentioned there, why do they go off and do better elsewhere? It's not just the opportunities, it's the facilities, it's the coaches, it's the fact they can have dedicated coaches. In Andy's article, he writes about how he even pro'd over here. I think it's Nelson Cricket Club.
He's been all over the place, actually. He's been down at Taunton Dean in Somerset, up in the Lancashire leagues as well.
And I think I only saw him play cricket, but his last season for Nelson CC was 2017 when he pro'd there. And I remember we've had a few South African pros who've come over with the express intention of having a cold pack deal. And when you ask them, well, what happens if you don't make it? It's like, well, I've almost got 10 years not to make it. I can be a 28-year-old jobbing pro, and suddenly I get a second 11 game, and suddenly I'm in the system. Because even just the club cricket facilities here are so different, and I suppose so much better and more reliable, yeah.
You mentioned that he'd done okay in South Africa. I think his figures are a little bit better than you suggested. He played 86 first-class games in South Africa, averaged 42. 22 in New Zealand, averaging 66 at Wellington. Do you have any answers to why suddenly a man goes to Wellington in New Zealand and is putting on a third more on his first class average?
Well, I think he said himself that he was being messed around a little bit in the batting lineup. He wasn't batting where he wanted to bat. He was constantly in and out of the side. The Kevin Peterson story, for example, constantly being messed around. But I think also he's got to take credit himself. I think he's the type of guy that made that move. He said that, like property prices, and it was a difficult, dangerous move to make. But there's stories, and this is where Twitter and the guys that write well about these backstories. There was a story where, he was rooming with Shamsi in Durban, and he said to Shamsi, look, I'll do the dishes every night if you bowl to me that little bit longer in the nets. And the coaches, in New Zealand would say he would always be the last one to leave. Coaches would say end of time, and he'd stay there and do some extra practice. I think you can say the system is better, but I think also because he's made that move, because he's taken that difficult step, he must want to make it work. And that's the thing that struck me about the lad, is that here is a guy who absolutely wants to make up for lost time and not just get 100, he wants to get a double 100 at Lord's.
Next story I'm going to pick out is a less uplifting story, if you like, and the headline in the Daily Mail is Furious Umpires Slam ECB as Racist, which is the withdrawal of a discrimination claim from two umpires, John Holder and Ish Darwood. I don't particularly want to go into that story per se, because that's still ongoing and developing, but it does touch on the Ollie Robinson story from the first day. Vish, just on that story, how do you think the ECB handled it?
I think they handled it in the only way they could. I thought Tom Harrison's statement, which was released shortly after Ollie Robinson's statement, was very strong, and I suppose it had to be, considering the day started with England with a show of unity. I think it's a bit flippant, but I put in my report the most damning thing was the fact that those historic tweets from Ollie Robinson basically ticked off 3 or 4 of the T-shirts they were wearing, And so for that reason, they had to go hard, and Harrison had to say what he said, yeah.
Captain in the middle of a test match, that's not a good story for a team to confront. How much of an impact could it have on a team in a test match? And B, how would Joe Root have had to handle that, do you think?
Well, it's not a good story at any time. It's even worse, and a horrendous story when at 10:30 you're lining up in front of the old pavilion wearing T-shirts for anti-discrimination, anti-hate, anti-sexism, anti-racism. And then by the end of the day, one of your team is having to make that sort of grovelling apology. I think you have a realisation, though, as captain, Mike, and you'll know that. When you get the job, it's not just about, when you're England captain, you're an ambassador for your team, your country, the sport. So it's not just a case of who bowls when, what do you do at the toss. It is about these bigger picture things that happen during a test match, after a test match. But all you can do at that point is put your arm round that individual. Once he crosses this boundary rope and goes out there, pretty much, not everything, but pretty much whatever he's done, you have to look after that lad. You said the next morning the eyes of everyone here and everyone around the world will be on Ollie Robinson. The last thing that lad needs to feel is that his team aren't backing him. I watched the huddle on day 2, and they were long words from Root, long words from Silverwood. There's a pat on the back from Silverwood. We support you. We will deal with the issue that's very serious at the end of this test match. But while you're out there on a cricket field for England, we will support you.
The story came from historic tweets of 8, 9, 10 years ago. Bad, poor tweets. But historic tweets. Is everything fair game when you're an England cricketer from a journalistic perspective?
I'm not sure from a journalistic perspective, but there's basically what Ollie Robinson has fallen foul of here is, I suppose, what we might term the athlete on social media charter. And that
which was the line you took, wasn't it, in your very good piece that day?
Yeah, so thank you very much. But so basically, it happened with footballers, professional footballers, quite a lot, whereby they get close to the first team and their tweets get sourced. Someone goes to them. It's quite easy to search through someone's tweets, and they're in a position where they have to address them. What happened with Ollie Robinson, because cricket isn't a particularly prominent sport over here, it took until he got to the cusp of a test debut, until he was probably handed his cap, where someone thought, I wonder if he's got any skeletons in his closet. And if he's nowhere near the England team, probably none of this comes up, really. And I suppose the athlete side of it is that no doubt he'll have to show contrition. It'll have to be quite a public showing of contrition. There's this company in the US, a load of companies in the US, that what they do is whenever someone gets bad PR and they're an executive of a company, they're basically paid to wipe their social media feed and also plant loads of nothing stories on the internet so that it pushes those Google searches far and far down onto the third page. The difference, though, with an athlete is that they can write their own stories. If he continues to play for England, he's an incredible bowler. He's been test ready for the last 2 years. He's going to do some brilliant things, and therefore those PR stories are going to be quite genuine PR stories because we write about what happens on the field, and he'll be exceptional in that way. So there is a way around it for him. There's also, he will have to show some quite public contrition, and no doubt behind closed doors, Tom Harrison will want to see that contrition, I suppose, quite openly as well. So, yeah, it would have been a difficult day for him. But in terms of fair game, I didn't rock up on Wednesday thinking, brilliant, I can't wait to go through this guy's tweets. I didn't start out in this industry, and I think, everyone who's pretty much up in that box right now, no one comes into this game to, dig some skeletons up from people's closets, really.
It's a very polarised debate at the moment in the country at large, really, about issues of race, gender, culture. Does this Ollie Robinson story fit into that particular narrative? Because I've asked people about what they think should be a fair and proportionate punishment, if at all. Some have said he should have been withdrawn from the match, he should never play for England again. Others are saying it was 8 years ago, what's the problem? It's a very polarised debate.
Yeah, it is. And I think what we've seen over the last year has been a correction of sorts. And it's not a correction from the norm. Really, it's a correction to the norm. And we talk about Robinson being 18 at the time. And, I'm very much pinning everything on the fact that he's a changed man. I think you'd be a fool not to. And I don't know him at all. And there's every chance he has changed completely. But I suppose the issue that people are going to have with those tweets is that, yes, he was 18. Some people say 18 is old enough to know better. The other sense is that it wasn't. You can't really view it as like almost your last cigarette, where one last bit of something discriminatory, and then I'll leave it there. And I suppose it's something that's going to follow him around for a while, because no matter how authentic his apology, no matter how much he has changed, some people just fundamentally won't believe it. And I suppose it's the product of being in an environment now where you're guilty until proven categorically innocent, and then even then, some people won't take it.
Brief one-word answer: should he play in the next game?
No. If there's an ongoing investigation, it's probably best for all parties if he misses out.
Yes or no?
No, I don't think so. You can't wear T-shirts for all they're trying to stand for, and then something like that happen and not do something about it.
The next story I'm going to pick out is Matt Dickinson. This is in the front pages of the Times, really, the main bit of the sports section, but talking about Naomi Osaka, who pulled out of the French Open, initially because she didn't want to do the press conference. They said they were bad for her mental health, and then the story kind of rolled on and she pulled out of the French Open. But there are ramifications for all different sports and different sports, men and women, of course. I'm guessing you don't really miss press conferences.
I don't, but again, I handle them slightly better than you, by the way. You Captain Grumpy in the press conference, crikey. Now, I always saw that, and I learned that was where I was very lucky. I was close to you, I was close to Graham Gooch, I was close to Alec, and I learned and watched all you, and the good things that you did and the not so good things. I, again, just saw it as part of my job. You go in there, you answer the questions, you're trying to sell your sport, and also, to a degree, and this is slightly different from Naomi Osaka, you're representing your nation, and there are people here that want answers. So when you stick them in Brisbane and they're 400 for 4 at the end of the day, they want answers. It's not just good enough to say, I'm not doing the press today. So I think there is an understanding in our jobs that we had that there was a duty as England captain to go in and face the press. What about in now? What in cricket? How would you react, or the press corps up there react, if one England player said, "You know what, I don't fancy doing the press for a while"? How do you think the reaction would be?
I mean, I think there'd be some annoyance, but we'd understand it. I mean, we've got an on-running joke up there that when it's looking like a bad day, we'll send a message in the media group being like, "We're getting a coach today, aren't we?" That's just the way it works now.
The old Duncan Fletcher day.
Yeah. And, if it's a bad day in the field, it's a bowling coach. With the bat, it's generally a batting coach. I suppose the difference with the Osaka thing is that she plays an individual sport,
yes.
Whereas there are, other players who front up in terms, if someone's had a bad day with the ball, then Broad or Anderson will generally puff their chest out and control the narrative because they're experienced at doing it. And I suppose the thing is, Osaka can't send out another coach there, and it's clearly something she's genuinely struggled with. And I think if you watch through old footage of her, you can kind of see it because we know about it now, I suppose. But I mean, we're a bit grumpy, but we're pretty much always grumpy up there.
How important is it to you? I mean, when I was captain, someone like Mike Selvey wouldn't come to every press conference. He would be away and having a glass or something and just have his own thoughts, and he didn't want dull quotes from me. So how crucial is it to a cricket journalist or any journalist to have that press conference?
Well, I suppose it touches on what I mentioned a bit earlier on, that we don't know what happens in there. We don't really know what happens there beyond the actual play and what we see from the scorecard. So sometimes there might be a tiff, and we'd want someone to iron that out, because otherwise we're all slaves to rumour at that point, aren't we? So I think it's very important for clarity's sake. Yeah.
Final story I'm going to pick up on is a more uplifting one. Dan Ibrahim, 16, played for Sussex yesterday against Yorkshire in a game where Dawid Malan got 100, but this young man got a half-century, became the youngest player to score a half-century in the county championship. What were you doing at 16? Or dare I ask?
You know what, I felt quite bad when Joe Root became Test captain, because it was the first time I was older than a Test captain. And I'm old enough to be this lad's dad. So, fair play to him, but yeah.
Have we got a bit of footage of him now, somewhere?
We have somewhere, yeah. He played pretty well, didn't he? He got 50. I think he got Cola Cadmore out. He's done really well. I think Bede College, they've got quite a good little school system down there, and he's a product of that school system. And Sussex are doing, I think they lost a lad to Kent, 20 recently. So they're doing pretty good things down there at the moment with introducing and playing young cricketers. It's got to be the way to go.
Well, age is irrelevant. It's just a number. You've got Dan Ibrahim there at 16. You've got Darren Stevens at 45.
Yeah, but I think it's always nice for any county, anywhere, that if he's also a product of their system. He's been there since 10. It's not someone they've gone and got or whatever. I think it's great for all those coaches, all the academy schools down below for a county. You've said it often, a judge of a county, are they producing their own cricketers? And Sussex has produced this lad, and not just produced him, they're playing him.
You see a bit of domestic cricket, first-class cricket. You've got 20 seconds to answer this. Who's the most promising young player that you've seen this year? Putting you right on the spot, Vish.
Most promising young player I've seen this year. Oh, wow. This is a problem. I'll just stick to Surrey and Middlesex. Jeez.
Metropolitan bias.
I know, yeah. I'm really outing myself here.
Blake Cullen?
Why not?
OK, Blake Cullen. There's plenty of good young players around. We've got a gorgeous day here at Lord's, and live cricket is coming up.